Say when. We're on. Okay. So, since we are all here in Wisconsin, let's start with Wisconsin. Some of you have heard of Wisconsin. It kind of looks like this, yes? All right, now the Indian Head over there by Minnesota, the Milwaukee, Madison, and of course the red dot, the garden spot of Wisconsin, namely Eleva. 5.3 million people, roughly, according to the last census. You may recognize this shape as well. That's a big chunk of England. There you can see Wales dotted off of there. I'm holding on to Scotland, but I didn't include it. What's that?
I'm Scottish.
Well, that's all right, miss. We'll get to that. And I've got a few of anti-British jokes for you Scots as well. You'll like those. Anyway, this is England. This is Wisconsin. This are on the same scale. They are about the same size, within about 1,000 square miles of each other. Yeah. But it has been truly said that the difference between Americans and the British is that Americans think 200 years is a long time. The British think 200 miles is a long distance. And the reason they think that is because in England they're running into everybody else. Wisconsin, this amount of square miles, 5.3 million people. Same amount of square miles, 57 million people, not counting Scotland. 11 times larger. That would mean here in 690 people in Eleva, going at 11 times larger, that would be Eleva and Strum and Mondovi and Osseo all together here for 7,500 people. That's 11 times larger. Mondovi, make it 11 times larger, it would be half the size of Eau Claire. That's how crammed it is, and a lot of Europe is like that. It's crammed. Okay? And the other thing is, of course, because they have all that history, they run into each other. So, we take this little stripe here, and our map of Wisconsin. You've done this before. You've driven from St. Paul to Chicago, haven't you? About 425 miles. If we shrink this down to this scale over here, 425 miles is about this. That would be going from Hamburg, Germany to Paris. So you would start in Hamburg with a history going back to about 600 AD, cross over the line into Holland, where they speak Dutch, then pass on from there across another border to Belgium, where they speak Flemish and Walloon, and the country is named for the Belgae. You never heard of the Belgae, have you? The Romans knew about the Belgae. When they were moving north in Europe, they managed to beat the tribes of Germania and establish trade relations with them. But the Belgae were so dangerous they didn't even try. The Belgians? Yes. Mm-hmm. And then you pass through there, through Brittany and Champagne to Paris in the same 425 miles from St. Paul to Chicago. Or if you want to do it the other way, you could start in Copenhagen. Anybody Danish here? Dansk? Oh yeah, a few, yeah, sure. That S-E-N instead of S-O-N on the end of the name. You know, Janssen.
The right way.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And if you go 425 miles, you come out here, and you can end up in Prague, which means you start in Denmark, and then you cross over into Germany, and you go through the Hanoverian German area on the Prostdeutsch, the Eastern German, and then you pass over the line into Bohemia on the way to Prague. Of course, if you go through, when you cross over the line, there's a very important Wisconsin moment, and that is you go through the provincial town of Pilsen, where they make beer. Pilsner beer. It's kind of a straw color with a white foam on top. Anybody notice American Pilsner style beer? Pilsen. And then you go past another little town who's embarrassed to be connected to beer, because in Czech it's called Budweiser. Budweiser. They make great beer there, and they think this stuff is crap. But that's 425 miles. It's, so it's just trying to get a grip on that. Now let's look for a minute here, if I can come up with something snazzy like that. Here's, oh yes, by the way, this happens to be a tie I wore this morning. I found this at the Goodwill. Not that we'd be walking around with the Ukrainian colors, would we? No. And there are some other colors up here that I'll let you in on later. But yeah, we have languages. Because if you're going to go from St. Paul to Chicago, it's English. It's Midwestern English. They're not out there trying to talk about down south and hunting dogs and all that kind of stuff. They're now out on the west, kind of wrangling down from the horse, are they? They're not even in Boston where they pack their car and have it got. It's all Midwest. They all talk normal, right? Anyone seen an oak tree? Anyone seen a maple tree? Yeah. Oak trees, big suckers. Cut them down to make great furniture, yes? Butcher block countertops. Maple tree, syrup. That's right. Tap that for syrup. Yep. Those are two different trees. In Europe, there are two different language trees. There's an oak called the Indo-European language tree. It has big branches, limbs going off of it. And they have evolved into languages. There is a Celtic branch, like the Scots, and the Irish, and the Welsh, and the Cornwalls, and the Bretons, and the Galicians of Spain. They're all Celtic languages. And they can kind of understand each other. And they do mostly play the bagpipe, all of them. Really? Celtic bags. Galician, the top corner of Spain, they have bagpipes. Dang, didn't know that. I didn't either. You don't know? No. Okay, fine. That's one branch on that tree. There is the Romance branch, as in Roman. And you know what language the Romans spoke, yes? Latin, yes. But Italian, yes. The Roma and Sicilian and Corsican and Spanish, and Leonese, and Aragonese, and Portuguese, and French, and Occitan, and Walloon. Oh, and Romanian. And then there are the Greeks, who are related to nobody, but they're Indo-European. You have then the Baltic, Latvian, and Lithuanian, who are related to no one else, but they know that they are older than all the rest of them. And then there's the Germanic branch. They have several varieties of German, including Ostdeutsch in Austria, and Süddeutsch in Bavaria, and Schweizdeutsch in Switzerland, part of it, and Luxembourgian, and Flemish, and Dutch, High Dutch and Low Dutch, and Frisian on the islands off of the Dutch coast. What?
That's the best one.
The Frisian. Ah, see that?
I'm from Friesland.
Friesland, yeah. Oh, and then there's English. And then there's the other part of the German branch, Danish and Swedish. And the best part, of course, yeah, well, right, the Norwegian, yeah. And the Icelandic, which has changed so little because they've been so isolated, that if Leif Erikson, who bumped into this continent in 1000 AD, would be resurrected from the dead and would be dropped on the streets of Reykjavik, he could carry on a conversation. And they could understand him. Okay? And then, we're not done.
No.
We have the Slavic branch. Yes, the Slavs.
Is that where the
Yes.
Estonians come in?
What's that?
Estonians, they're there?
Not yet.
Oh, yeah.
I'm saving the best for last.
Well, I knew that.
That's right, you knew that. So the Slavic branch, you have the Albanians, the Montenegrins, the Bosnians, the Herzegovinians, the Slovenians, the Bulgarians, the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Ruthenians, the Poles, and then switching alphabets to the Cyrillic, but still Slavic languages, the Belarusians, White Russian, the Ukrainians that we've all heard about, and the Russians. And now we get to the good part. Because now we go over to that other tree, which is the Finno-Ugric tree. The Finno-Ugric tree. The Indo-Europeans started from India, and actually these languages are related to Hindi and some of those others in India.
Really?
Yes. Our bunch started out in Mongolia and split up after they got over here. So we have up here among the Finno, we have the Sami.
They're good too.
Yeah, sure. The Sami, who are the last nomadic people left in Europe. They are reindeer herders. Sometimes they're called, they live in Lapland, the Laps. They mostly are rural people, but once in a while they do come into the cities and you can spot them right away, even here in America. Because if you're on a bus or on a train, and the guy who cannot stand up is from there, because he's a Laplander, right? Oh, God, is that bad? Oh, ouch, yeah. So, they're crawling under the table. They're not throwing things yet. That's getting close. Right? We also have Finnish and Karelian and Ingrian and Livonian, and of course the high point, the Estonian, and we have Hungarian. And maybe, no one's quite sure, maybe Basque. We're sure it's not Indo-European. It might be feeling a little Greek, but no one's quite sure. Basque, with a French, Spanish border in there. So this is what's going on, and all these people have been here for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and even thousands of years, and they've had other people arrive, sometimes nicely, sometimes not so nicely. And that's where we get to Eastern Europe here. So, I apologize, it's big, and we are going to give you a 10-minute max touching on what has happened in East Europe. If we go back to 1000 AD, when Leif Erikson is indeed bumping into North America. Here are all the current boundaries. In 1000 AD, and ignoring everything that's going on in France, Germany, England, and all those dumb countries over here, we have Kiev, Kievian Rus, and it covers that much territory. And they're bumping up against the Poles and the Hungarians, who are running most of the rest of Eastern Europe. And after 200 years, in 1200 AD, the Kievians have expanded over there. And the Hungarians have broken all the way through to the Adriatic Sea because they want more vacations. They want a beach. 1200 years. You'll notice there's a whole lot of people who aren't there. And everybody else is being clobbered by these people because they are in charge. If we skip ahead to 1300 AD, 790 years ago, the map looks a heck of a lot different. Go. Kiev has disappeared. Everybody has disappeared. And this orange mass is the Golden Horde. Genghis Khan. They have come 7,000 miles on horseback. Good riders. Saddle sores like you wouldn't believe. To here, and they're running the place. The Hungarians are running most of the rest of the place, and this bunch, they're called Rus. Them's the Russians. Right there. And this has had an immense impact on what's going on to this day in Europe, because here came this insane bunch of people from way out east. And they're Asian. And there's a lot of them. And they stayed for 200 years running things. And it is from this period that the animosity and the prejudice of the Russian people toward the Chinese and the Mongolians begins. The other thing is, here we have the Ural Mountains, which didn't help at all because they're still 500 miles down here, and you could still take a horse through there. Okay. And here's Moscow, Muscovy, just a collection of mud huts in 1307. Okay. Anyone been to Kansas? Nebraska? The Dakotas? It's flat, right?
I
highway too, going to Montana?
Eastern Montana, Saskatchewan, Alberta, it's flat. And after you drive over that, it gets flatter. And after that, it gets even flatter. And that's here. This is Kansas on steroids. It is so flat, it's scary. People get very excited when they see a gopher hole because, look, there's an elevation. There are a couple of rivers of fair size, but because it's so flat, they are basically elongated puddles. They have no flow to them at all, and they spread out. And then they spread out. And then they spread out. And so if you're on horseback, your horse's ankles get wet for a half a mile while you're crossing, but it's no barrier. And this is the second piece of what's going on among the Russian mindset. You can't stop these people. There's no place to hide. There's no place to retreat to. There's no river to hide behind. There's no mountain fortress. And they're afraid. And the only way you can survive is copy them. If they're going to expand as far and as long as they want to, we got to do the same. And the same rules apply. There's nothing to stop them. There's a lot of them. So, we move on to 1400 AD, 100 years later. And guess what? All kinds of people like to expand. The Golden Horde is still here. The Lithuanians and Poles decide, let's expand. There's nothing to stop us either, and they didn't. The Hungarians are still being the Hungarians. Oh, and then there's Muscovy. There's a bunch of barons up there. The barons of Moskva, the river there. And they decide, okay, we're going to start growing. And that's why their country is, it looks like a blob on the map. There's nothing to stop them. You don't go around there. You just gotta keep going. But the Golden Horde is still there in major numbers and in major territory. They shrunk a little bit. So by the time we get down now to 1600, things are improving, maybe. Here are the Russians. They've grown a bit, yes? Only took them 200 years to do it. The Poles and Lithuanians, they're a country from the Baltic to the Black Sea. They are the major power in East Europe. Oh, and then there's a bit of the Golden Horde left, but they're obviously on the way out. 300 years later, you know, like if we would say, oh, finally, the Indians who were living in Virginia when the Jamestown colony was founded, they would finally say, now we're finally chasing those English out of here. 300 years. And yeah, there have been other players here, you know. In 1700, we have Sweden, and they come and they are big in Finland and Estonia and Latvia, and Poland is off the map. But Saxony, and guess what language they speak? They are on the map. And everything that way is Russia. And it's getting bigger and bigger because they don't run into anything. And they outnumber just about everybody. And they don't mind stomping on people because they got stomped on by the Golden Horde for 400 years. So we're going to turn around and do that to everybody we can. And so they've been doing this back and forth for the last 300 years. The Saxons, the Russians, the Swedes, the Hungarians, the Poles, the Lithuanians, and whoever was in charge was stomping on the small folk. Like the Estonians. We were the last pagans in Europe. 1100 AD, the Crusaders, trying to retake Jerusalem from those Muslims, they got their hat handed to them. They couldn't do it. We can't beat them. God is on our side. We can't beat them. We got to find somebody else we can beat. And so the Pope said, go. There's a bunch of people living up here who aren't Christian. Let's go conquer them and make them Christian. That would be my people. Now, there had been Russian Orthodox missionaries here, so we knew about crosses and a little bit about Jesus, but it was not an Orthodox area. And the Germans came in, and they beat us. You know, if you're hoping for something coming, there's a hand gesture all of you do because you're all West European, right? What do you do with your fingers if you're hoping for something good to happen? Cross your fingers. The priest said, yes, you make the sign of St. Andrew. The cross of St. Andrew. Don't do that in Estonia. You hold your thumbs for good luck. Because that's our religious tradition. And you learn to fight back in subtle ways. I mean, you're outnumbered, right? They got the guns, they got the numbers, they got everything. But you try and fight back however you can. So the Germans came in, they settled there, and they brought Western Christianity with them. And they said, by the way, our leaders are the priests. Do you have a word for priests? They said, yes. They said, yes. We heard this from the Orthodox. Oh, okay. Well, why don't you just use that word for priest? Huh? Right. And then, there are these brothers who live together in abbeys. We call them monks. Did those Orthodox guys tell you about monks? Yeah. So we have an Estonian word for monk, too. Oh, just go use that. Took the Germans 30 years to figure out that the Estonian word that we were using for priest means in Estonian liar. And it took them 30 years to figure out that the Estonian word that we were using for monk was thief. Oh, brother thief, why don't you come over here? So you have to do that because you're gonna get clobbered. See? And there's been a lot of clobbering. We've read recently about the deportations. Thousands of people put on Russian buses in Mariupol and taken over here. This is the Russian way of war. In 1939, Stalin, a fun guy, Hitler, a fun guy, and here we are in the middle. They make a deal. We're going to both invade Poland, but we're not going to fight each other. Now, Hitler scotches the deal 2 years later, but to start with. So Stalin says, fine, we'll go here into these neutral countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. 6 million people combined. 180 million Russians. And Stalin says to the Estonians, we're going to send in, we're not going to ask, we're going to send in 25,000 troops. That's 2.5% of the population to ensure your neutrality. Against who is always the burning question, right? Same in Latvia, same in Lithuania. My dad can remember later on that fall and winter, Stalin made the same offer to Finland. We ought to send some troops in there. And the Finns said, go jump in the lake. We got 10,000 of them, as many as they have over there in Minnesota. And so the Russians came. The Winter War. The Finns lost, but they lost hard. It's tough when you take on a country when the national sport is riflery. Not football, not archery, no, riflery. The guys who walk around with the letter jackets in the high school. Hey, he's the captain of the rifle team. If I want to date him. Yeah, really. The Finns were short on ammunition. The standing order was for the Finnish infantry, draw a bead on a Russian soldier and wait until some other guy is standing behind him and then shoot so you get more out of that one bullet. And they could do it. My dad can remember, they lived 2 miles from the Tallinn airport. Russian bombers taking off to fly the 55 miles to bomb Helsinki. The Estonian government protested all they dared that this was considered to be unneutral. What do you say, right? They got the guns, right? They got the planes. They got the tanks. This is unneutral, and the Russian ambassador ignored the president of Estonia. On the other hand, my dad also knows that every week you would go to the movies, right? And in those days, the start of the movies, you'd show the newsreels, right? Catch up on the news. They would show newsreels of the Russian soldiers being slaughtered in the Finnish forests. And the entire audience would stand up and cheer. And the Russian ambassador called on the Estonian president to protest this non-neutral applause in the movie houses of Tallinn. And the president said, well, what can I do? Next year, June 13th, 1941, the Russians, having been working for 9 months, came and loaded overnight 60,000 Estonians onto cattle cars to send them 10 time zones. We only have 4 in the U.S. 10 time zones to Siberia, never to be heard from again. Anyone who holds political office, anyone who's a policeman, member of the military, teachers, clergy, business leaders, leaders of labor unions, judges, prosecutors, and their families. To get a feel for this, if we had the same thing go on here in Wisconsin, you've been to Eau Claire, about 60,000 people. Anybody been to Green Bay? Sure you have. 75,000 people, plus the fringes, right? Suppose tomorrow morning, they're all gone. On trains to the North Slope of Alaska. You'll never hear from them again. That would be the percentage. There'd be the houses, there'd be the streets, there'd be the businesses, there'd be the buildings, and there's no one there. Oh, and by the way, if you happen to be out of town in La Crosse, and you come home, you say, where is everybody? And you go to the police station, and say, where is everybody? And they say, why are you asking? You should have been with them. We'll send you. Yeah. So this is not all that new. In 1941, a week later, Hitler tears up the pact. He invades. The Estonian underground comes out overground, and they start taking out Russians wherever they can. It is truly said, after 900 years, all Estonian history happens between conquerors. Did here, on July 24th, 1941, the Russians evacuated Tallinn, the capital. The Estonian underground came out and put up blue, black, and white flags. Blue, black, white flags. And declared, by the way, we're neutral in this war. And on July 25th, the German army arrived, took down all the flags, and said, no, now you get to belong to us. In September of 1944, the Red Army comes, and on September 21st, they get to the edge of Tallinn, and the Germans are evacuating forced laborers like my dad, like my mother, 60,000 of them, to go to Germany to fix planes, to make bullets. And the swastika comes down in the center of town. And on the 22nd, the Estonian flag goes up. And on the 23rd, the Russian hammered sickle arrives. So my people and millions of others ended up in Germany. And finally, on the right side of the Elbe River, a lot of them, which ended up being the American and British occupation zones. Stalin, in the meantime, has declared, by the way, anybody with an Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, or Polish passport is now a Soviet citizen. Isn't that nice? And by the way, we want them all back. We want them all back. And they are in various camps all through Germany, guarded by American GIs on occupation duty, and the British. And the Soviet trucks would come up with Soviet soldiers, and they'd say, we are repatriating all the Soviet citizens. And the Lithuanians in the camp, or the Ukrainians in the camp, they went to the British Tommies or the American GI Joes, and they slapped them. And the GIs or the Tommies looked at them and said, what? Hit him again. Why are you doing this? Kill me now, so I don't have to get on that truck. So you fight back how you can. So if you're Estonian, you might wear an ascot or a scarf. It happens to just accidentally be blue, black, and white. And when my cousins in Estonia got married in the 1950s, they saved their money and they hired a photographer. You do that for a wedding, don't you? You go down and the photography, so you get the formal photos, right? And then, but then you hire the guy to come to the wedding and to the reception, and take those candid photos. Don't you do that? Yes, do. And Grandma is there, and she's dressed for the occasion in a beautiful, very chic black dress. Black it can be quite nice, that. Grandma's there, and let's pose for a picture. Yeah, let's have Grandma in her black dress. And then the granddaughter, who's the bride, she's all in white. And then the maid of honor, who's the other granddaughter, she's in blue, and we're going to take that picture. Not that we're just taking pictures, comrade. And you go to the funeral of somebody, and Grandpa has died. They're at the funeral house, and they're laid out for the viewing, right? And they're in a white shirt, and a blue suit, and a black tie. It's just it was his favorite suit, comrade. Right? And his wife gave him that tie. And it's just a white shirt, right? So I'm going to take questions now, but I don't want to leave you on a downer. So one of the other ways you fought back was with jokes, with humor. Carefully. And you will hear that this, they're funny, but there's an edge underneath there. It's a little... The first one is actually only from 5 weeks ago, when the invasion of Ukraine started. And all of a sudden, Sweden and Finland are making serious noises about joining NATO. Putin doesn't like that. And so he sends an official message in diplomatic channels that this would not be a good idea. The way to think of this is a gangster calling on Finland and saying, you know, it was most unfortunate that on the south side, Zelensky and his boys kind of got out of trouble. So I had to send in some of my boys. And it would be most unfortunate, Finland, if I would have to send some of the boys into the north side of town. Well, he sent that. The Finns, remembering the Finnish War, they reacted on social media, on Twitter, and the one that went viral was the one that said, there are already thousands of Russian troops in Finland, all along the eastern border, all 2 meters down. We would say 6 feet under. It's funny, but there's some moxie to that too. Second one is Czechoslovakia, middle there, 1968. There was a kind of an upheaval in the Communist Party, and they got a new prime minister named Alexander Dubček. You might remember him. Okay. And he was putting up all kinds of dangerous ideas like free speech. Oh, God! And was talking about free press. And in August, Brezhnev of Russia sent the tanks in, and that all ended. But that summer, it was still kind of up for grabs. And the joke banged around Prague. And it has a religious dimension, so Pastor Karen will be happy. The story is that Brezhnev wants to meet with Dubček to get him to knuckle under. And Dubček is not happy about that. So they agree they need a third party to do kind of some mediation. So they pick Mao Zedong of China. Okay. So they all get on the same plane to fly to Brezhnev's dacha, the mansion in the country. And as always happens in these jokes, the plane crashes and everyone dies, right? At the pearly gates, there's the religious part. St. Peter comes out, and there's Brezhnev, Mao Zedong, and Dubček. Yeah. And Peter already knows there's probably 2 guys at least that have the wrong address. But we're gonna, and then he's got a job to do. We're gonna play this. So he says to all 3 of them, if you had one wish back on earth, what would you wish for? Mr. Brezhnev? Brezhnev says, I would wish for an earthquake to level China. Golden Horde, 13th century, right? And Peter writes something down in the book. Mr. Mao Zedong. And Mao looks over at Brezhnev and then looks at Peter and says, I would wish for a flood that would drown Russia. Peter writes some more stuff. So, Mr. Dubček. And Dubček says, well, if you've already granted those other 2 wishes, I would wish for a cup of coffee. Life is good.
Say, I noticed that St. Peter has normal language of the mid-western accent.
Only for you.
So this is God's country, is what you're saying.
Right. And finally, look at this. This is a joke that actually works in several languages: Finnish, Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian, Polish, Hungarian, Romanian. And you know a little bit now of their history. And I heard it as a Polish version, but you can plug in your favorite ethnic group. It goes like this: that if you are a Polish soldier in the army, and a war breaks out, and by great good fortune, you have the chance to shoot a Russian soldier and a German soldier. Yeah. Which one do you shoot first and why? And the answer, you shoot the German first, and then the Russian. And why? Business before pleasure. Because when you've been run over like this by everybody. All right, I hope that helps a little bit on what's going on and why things are testy and touchy, and there are deportations, and there are depredations, and there are massacres, and questions?
Why does it seem like Russia and China are kind of allied up a little bit now?
For the moment.
For the moment.
Yeah, this is a new phenomenon in the last 60 years. The previous 1,000, no, they weren't. Some of it has to do with communist ideology. Some of it has to do with the one thing the Russians have. They do have a lot of gas, oil, and a lot of minerals. And China has a booming economy that could use gas, oil, and a lot of minerals for their stuff. So they work out. It's mostly trade-based.
Okay.
On the other hand, in 1860, there was a treaty in Peking that the Western nations imposed on a very weakened China, and Russia said, we would like to take Yongming-chen and the surrounding countryside. And they did, and they renamed it Vladivostok, that city on the Pacific at the end of the Trans-Siberian Railroad. There have been several rumors on some of the sites I've been reading that the Chinese may want to make an offer to buy it back, because Russia's going to need to rebuild, and they're going to need money to do it. The Chinese have got the bucks. That's only 9 time zones away, though. So. But yeah, but a lot of So the alliance is strictly pragmatic and very recent. Very recent. Not with this history. Very recent. Others? You're stunned, I know. All right. Well, I thank you. I'll be here. So if you want to come up and ask personal questions, you want me to hear rattle on in Estonian, I can do that too, you know. So, yeah. Tänan väga teie tulemast. What?
Have some more cake.
Oh, I have some more cake. Palun, armsa rahva, võtta kookid siin. Ja kohvi ja pitää. Oh, you drink. Palun. Thank you very much.
Is he a little enemy of my enemy?
There's a bit once in a while.
On the alliance or whatever.
Yeah, the Chinese-Russian thing, yeah.
Were you a teacher?
No, always wanted to be a teacher, though.
Oh, you do it very well. I love his accent. You look
Just
learnable.
it's just accidental. In Latvia, the colors are red, white, red. At a funeral, all kind of men get buried in a burgundy suit, white shirt, red shirt. Well, it's a communist red. Just by accident. It's just coincidence. Well, it's been going on for about 1,000 years, so. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Back and forth. And I disagree because that was signed in 1919, Versailles Treaty against Germany. And left Germany bankrupt and ruined and bitterly resentful. And then this guy comes along with a little Charlie Chaplin mustache and it was worse. So in 1945, after that whole disaster went down, we did the Marshall. We rebuilt Germany, who had just been bombing us last year. And that's what we got. It worked out a lot better than. Yes, but at their request, which is a whole different ballgame. The Russians, they request to put soldiers in war country. And they don't say no, they don't take no for an answer. Yes.
What is that area?
You got it. Yes.
You know, I had
Yes. And also in the middle of Finland, there's a narrow spot here. And during the Winter War, Stalin sent 20,000 men to cut Finland in half and march over here to the Gulf of Botnia. Okay? It's endless pine forests. In 6 weeks, 1,800 came back. The Finns killed 18,000 of them. And for 20 years afterwards, the Finnish lumberjacks who would go there in the summer to cut trees, they would find skeletons in rotting Soviet uniforms for 20 years. But the slaughter was insane. And by the way, if you watch the Olympics, the Winter Olympics, there's this funny little sport called biathlon, which is cross country, and then you stop and you do some shooting. You do cross country on skis, and you get down and you shoot, and it's now a sport. But it wasn't a sport then.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I was probably in grade school. I guess it's kind of a
Yeah.
story like these 4 teenagers.
Yes.
Yes.
Scouting, yeah, all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah. All, yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's really interesting. I can see Sue. You and Sue.
Well, we tried. You know, and she, of course, she's the teacher.
Yeah. That was really good.
Well, I thank you for coming.
Say hi to her.
I will.
About a dissenter.
What's that?
I don't.
Right. Yeah. Well, they said that there are plenty of Soviet troops that are 6 feet under by the eastern border, which all got killed back in 1940. You know. Yeah. Before they walk off with this good stuff, I'm going to get one of these good stuffs. I'm just making it. No. Positive. I'm still losing weight. I'm going to keep doing it.
Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Not too shabby, huh?
What's that?
Not too shabby. It looks
Well,
good
a
with
little
my
blue, a little
outfit.
black, a little white.
I just
Oh, yeah,
bought
that's
this sweatshirt.
Not that you're making a political. Thank you, sir.
Oh, no, I wouldn't. Thanks. Hey, Warren, you would one lap. Carl, he doesn't look half bad, does he?
No?
Look like a bastard.
I like a pastor, kind of the skull look there, yeah.
Gracie plays.
I was pointing out we weren't here. These are the Estonian colors. This country here. They have a flag that returns these blue, black, and white up the bottom. That's their flag. During the Soviet occupation, when the Russians were there, you